while traveling through this world of war. Here there's no sickness, toil, or danger in that bright world to which I go. I'm going there to see my father. I'm going there no more to roam. I'm only going overjoyed. I'm only going over home.
Welcome to Your Brain, a Personal Tour, Seminar 6. Today we talk about some difficult topics, but also about some amazing progress. The goal of the seminar will be to talk not only about some tragic events in the life of many brains, but also to talk about awesome progress that's being made with new tools, with new software, and new understanding of brain operation and recovery. My personal goal is that each seminar participant gains a better understanding of these brain conditions and a better understanding of how each of you can take steps today to minimize negative effects and to advance brain research. The subtitles deals with contributions to this area. They come from many sources. Some are quotidian like dog walking, some are sci-fi like Jedi monkeys. I hope you'll be as fascinated as I was to understand how each of these can contribute to process and to the relief of suffering. Welcome to the seminar. I hope you enjoy it. Today we'll talk about 3 areas. The first condition we'll discuss is Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease is a specific case of a more general disorder called senile dementia, and it's the #1 fear of Americans in terms of growing older. This disease places dramatic burdens on family, on friends, and on communities. But recent advances in brain science show hopeful potential, and there is something that each and every one of you can do today to help yourself and to progress the research. Next, we'll talk about some new horizons, both in your brain as well as your gut, which have just begun to be appreciated for their role in dementia and other neurological conditions. The research here is as fascinating as it is practical. And finally, we'll talk about recovery from trauma. And by that I mean injuries not only to your brain and how to repair them, but also on how your brain can help recover from a devastating trauma to your body. Spectacular progress is being made here, and that means life-changing events for the positive for many people. Now, this is not a downer seminar. Progress is being made in each of these areas. The following clip is from a well-respected neurologist on a topic that's near and dear to each of us, protecting your brain. There's a way that we can do something today that will help us now. Let's take a look.
Back in the day when I was in medical school, we were told that each of us was given a certain number of brain cells, whether it was 100 billion or however many brain cells you were lucky enough to get, and that was pretty much it. That was what you were left with, and every time you drank a beer, you'd lose 30,000 brain cells or whatever the number was for some reason. I don't remember. But that said, the idea that humans don't grow new brain cells is actually now fully demonstrated to be wrong. How exciting it is that we possess the ability to regrow brain cells, a process called neurogenesis, and that we retain this ability throughout our entire lifetimes. So the question you may be wondering is, well, what can I do to increase neurogenesis? I'd like to grow back new brain cells, and here's how to do it. Neurogenesis happens when your brain produces more BDNF. It stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor. That's sort of the growth hormone for the brain, and we know that you can turn on the amount of BDNF in your brain with at least 2 things. Number 1, physical exercise, specifically of the aerobic type, and number 2, by taking into your body a specific omega-3 called DHA. Both of these things stimulate BDNF, and therefore lead to increased amounts of BDNF. Let's take a look at how physical exercise makes that happen. Published in 2011 in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, a study called Exercise Training Increases the Size of the Hippocampus and Improves Memory. What the researchers looked at was the size of the brain's memory center called the hippocampus, which we know tends to shrink as we age in perfect correlation with our declining memory. And the study looked at 120 adults over a 1-year period. Half the group did some stretching exercise, the other half did some aerobic exercise. They measured the size of the hippocampus with MRI scans. They measured their blood levels of this brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or the brain's growth hormone, and even perhaps most importantly, they measured their memory function at the beginning, at 6 months, and in 1 year. And what they found was that those individuals who did the aerobic exercise in comparison to those who just did stretching had a marked increase in their BDNF levels, meaning more brain growth factor. And in addition, those individuals who did the aerobic part of the story had, quote, substantial improvement in memory function. These results clearly indicate that aerobic exercise is neuroprotective, and that starting an exercise regimen later in life is not futile for either enhancing cognition or augmenting brain volume. There is no other prescription. There is nothing that can be written on a prescription pad, although I tend to write that on a prescription pad, please exercise. There's nothing you can get at the pharmacy that will improve your memory and protect your brain. And now we know that the simple act of aerobic exercise will not only improve memory function, but actually allows you to regrow new cells in your brain's memory center. That's pretty powerful information. I'm Dr. David Perlmutter.
The DHA Dr. Perlmutter was talking about can be bought in a variety of forms in your local supermarket. You can go to a specialty vitamin store, but it's not necessary. It's typically found either in a pure form, and it'll be labeled DHA on the bottle, or more commonly, it'll come as fish oil. This fish oil will have both omega-3 EPA and DHA. But recall, it's the DHA that has been found to be clinically impactful. There is nothing that I found in my readings that said any particular kind of fish oil is better than another. So it doesn't need to be wild-caught salmon. These can be factory-farmed fish for all I see in the literature. And in fact, most scientific studies these days use DHA that has been obtained from algae. So you do not have to pay extremely high prices in order to obtain this chemical to help protect your memory. I want to show one slide from that video again. Please note that the neuroprotective effects of exercise can be enjoyed even, as they say, later in life, a stage that I, and perhaps some of you, are familiar with. So there's no excuse not to start exercising today. What kind of exercise? Let's take a look. I read the study Dr. Perlmutter referred to, and I found some very interesting facts. First, the average age of the study participant was 65 years of age. Second, the aerobic exercise they used was brisk walking. Now, this walking had to be aerobic, so that meant getting your heart rate up to 60, 70, 75% of your maximum heart rate calibrated by age. So this is a heart rate chart where I've placed a red dot on the target range for the study participants. And at this level, this is the kind of exercise that has now been shown to be neuroprotective. It helps you grow new brain cells. It helps you improve your memory. For some people, vigorous walking can be a challenge. Well, I'm happy to say that there's many forms of exercise that can be positive for mental function. For example, Tai Chi. In a recent review of the literature of over a dozen randomly controlled trials, Tai Chi was found to be effective in enhancing cognitive function in older adults, especially in a group or social setting. So if you don't like to walk briskly, try Tai Chi. So want to grow more brain cells? Want to have the neuroprotective effects of exercise? Then walking is a great way to start, especially with a dog. If mobility is an issue, then talk with your doctor about some other kind of aerobic exercise plan. Consider Tai Chi, for example. One final point we'll see later in the seminar is that social factors help as well. So if you're going to walk, why not do it with a friend? People are almost as good as dogs. Now, my wife is a professional dog trainer, so of course I had to work dog walking into the seminar. But if dogs aren't your thing, well then feel free to try alligators, or reindeer, or iguanas, or even turtles. The main thing is get some exercise. You'll be glad you did it, and your brain will be glad you did it. Let's focus in more detail now on Alzheimer's disease, or AD. Not only is AD the number one fear of many growing old, it also places significant burden on society, on family, and on other people. Virtually every minute, someone in the U.S. is diagnosed with AD. Millions of caregivers devote billions of hours of care. The net result being billions of dollars in cost to the nation and inestimable cost to families. In fact, some families will go hungry in order to care for a loved one with AD. As devastating as AD is here in the U.S., a high-income country, the projected effects of AD is expected to be much worse in the low to middle-income countries around the world. Some, perhaps half, of this increase is due to longer lifespans in the global population. In other words, improvement in the overall quality of life, which leads to longer lifespans, have a correlated effect of more people being diagnosed with AD, since they're living longer than their parents or grandparents. But there's another factor in operation here, and these are factors associated with lifestyle and environment. This slide presents a host of factors for either decreasing AD risk, green arrows, or increasing AD risk, red arrows, in both humans and rodents. We include rodents, and that means rats or mice, since they're the most common animal model in which we study AD in the lab. The good news here is that there's lots of green arrows on the slide. The bad news is that there are many red arrows still on the slide. And the red arrows tend to be associated with factors that we find in poorer countries. For example, pesticides, pollution, metal contamination, and poor nutrition. We'll talk about cognitive simulation in a moment, but I do want to draw your attention to the green arrow associated with physical activity. You'll also see the impact of good nutrition with green arrows, and correspondingly, red arrows with bad nutrition. So this is just not a personal problem for people, but a global problem for societies, and nations will have to bind together and work as a whole to address some of these risk factors. So where are we relative to AD in 2016? We'll look at 4 areas. The first is current treatment and trials. Unfortunately, the news here is not very good. Second, we'll see how studies with religious orders have helped us understand that building cognitive reserves of brain power can really help lower the risk of the disease. Third, we'll look at new ways of detecting AD early in life. The better we can do this, the better we can apply new approaches with promise. And fourth, we'll look at new treatments in the pipeline and what they can mean to the treatment of this disease for us or for our children and grandchildren. Unfortunately, by the time AD is diagnosed, it can almost be too late. Treatment options today are very limited once a fully confirmed diagnosis is rendered. And that's because the disease is likely present decades prior to diagnosis. At a typical age of diagnosis, shown on the left, the brain has changed dramatically, as shown on the right. The thickness of neurons in the cortex has thinned considerably. The white matter of the brain, that is, the connections of the various parts of the brain, are atrophied. The brain has just overall shrunk. 2 changes in particular stand out. The first is amyloid plaques in the white matter of the brain. These are now understood to form an accumulation of a specific amino acid, A-beta 42. This amino acid is naturally produced in your brain, but in AD, A-beta 42 is not cleared sufficiently and it builds up, leading to plaque. Inside of the neurons, the cells of the brain, there are tangles in the basic cellular machinery. These tangles interfere with normal neuron operation and hence result in loss of cognitive ability. The tangles are caused by the presence of a misfolded, naturally occurring protein called the tau protein. This misfolding seems to be caused by the accumulation of A-beta 42 by a cellular mechanism unknown to date. So, not too much good news on the current treatment front, but nuns to the rescue. A particularly difficult aspect of any scientific study of AD is the length of time over which the disease developed. Decades. How does one get a control group to compare changes of lifestyle, etc.? Well, religious orders offer a fantastic opportunity in this regard. A group of nuns, for example, live a very similar lifestyle, over many, many years, decades often. And one group of nuns in particular at Notre Dame contributed greatly in our understanding that exercising your brain and building what is called a cognitive reserve dramatically lowers your risk for AD. The world is a better place due to these nuns, not only because of their charity, but because of their contributions to science. The initial finding was that nuns who expressed in their daily journals a high density of ideas, in other words, they had a rich writing style or a learned writing style, were significantly lower in risk for AD. This caused a flurry of studies to examine other aspects of lower AD risk, and the results were interesting. For example, bilinguals rarely get AD. Likewise, people who play musical instruments, or read a lot, or play novel games a lot. These results focused attention on a brain quality termed cognitive reserve, a loose quality perhaps similar to muscle mass that conferred protective ability for your brain to ward off AD. Finally, it was noted that the earlier such reserves were generated, the better, but starting even late in life had positive effects. The key finding coming out of AD research today is that we need to detect it as soon as possible. The sooner someone understands their risk, the sooner treatment and building even more cognitive reserve can begin. It turns out there's some very promising developments here. First, there are clear genetic markers for elevated risk of AD. The best example is a gene variant called APOE4. Inheritance of this gene variant is associated with significantly elevated risk, as shown on the left side of this slide. Common genetic tests like 23andMe test for this gene variant. This testing can be done prior to conception and at birth, well before any symptoms appear, and hopefully before any brain changes. Later in life, we can test for the presence of an imbalance of the critical amino acid A-beta 42 in cerebrospinal fluid. This is done by puncturing the spinal cord in the lower back and withdrawing some fluid. Several years ago, this was deemed a risky procedure. However, recent experience in Europe indicates that the procedure is low risk and can easily be tolerated. Finally, tremendous progress has been made in developing compounds that pass the blood-brain barrier and highlight brains that are at high risk of AD, but prior to symptoms being presented. All of these procedures mean that today it is much more likely that we can identify a person at risk for AD decades before the symptoms present, and close in time to many changes in the brain that precede the expression of the disease. When we find such a person, then intensive effort to build cognitive reserve can be focused. Of course, it never hurts to build this for everyone. If we detect brain degenerations associated with AD, is there anything on the horizon that looks like it could repair the damage? The answer in this case is a qualified yes, but it's early in the research cycle and the sample sizes are small. There are clear grounds for hope, but not grounds to pop champagne corks just yet. The therapies focus on two main themes: addition of neural stem cells aims at increasing the brain's natural ability to generate new cells. Recall Dr. Perlmutter's video at the start of this seminar. The cells can come from the patient or someone else. Early research is positive on the potential positive effects, but cost is an issue, and the development of cancers is an issue. The main point here is that there is an active research program that's receiving major focus and funding. Perhaps not for us in this seminar, but for our grandchildren. This will be an available therapy to help repair the damage from AD. The second set of therapies involve repetitive stimulation of the target areas of the brain using transcranial stimulation. The great advantage here is that surgery to open the skull is not required. Magnetic fields or direct currents are applied to targeted areas, and this has had the effect of stimulating cell growth and recovery of function in early trials. Given that the main symptoms of AD are memory loss and confusion, both therapies are targeted to major areas of the brain that support this function. Any guesses? Well, it turns out the hippocampus, which we saw in Seminar 3, and the prefrontal cortex, which we covered in both Seminars 3 and Seminars 4, are the target for both of these therapies. I will bet the majority of the people in this seminar have personally interacted with this disease. In your family, with your parents, with your friends, and there's something that each and every one of you can do to help those people. You can support advanced research on the hallmarks of AD by playing a video game. Surprised? Don't be. This is happening more and more in science, and it is an all too rare societal benefit from those all too common mobile smartphones. The name of the game is Sea Hero Quest. You can download it from the iTunes Store or Google Play. You basically solve puzzles relating to searching mazes, etc., and you can help progress Alzheimer research with your thumbs. When I gave this seminar last year, there was much excitement about a new drug to treat AD in both the popular and the research press. Group trials had just started and the optimism was palpable that a drug for AD was, quote, within reach. Well, as so often happens with AD drug research, this is the status 1 year later. Unfortunately, this kind of sequence is the rule in AD research. As it states in the article, over 250 drugs have been tested with only one being granted a license for use. However, that's not a reason to stop trying. So let's look at a few current trials. Perhaps the most exciting drug is called aducanumab. In 2016, Nature reported on this drug, and the exciting thing was that when you do brain scans of people who have Alzheimer's disease, and we show those brain scans on the right, we compare a baseline within the treatment of this drug over the course of a year, and here red indicates plaque buildup. So red in the diagrams on the right are related to the expression of Alzheimer's disease. What we see with this particular drug is dramatic reversal of plaques. They seem to be cleared within the brain, and that is associated with the recovery of mental function. So these are outstanding results, both in terms of the halt of the progression of this disease as well as potential recovery of mental function. That's outstanding progress, but we must be mindful of the typical progress of drug research here. Where we are in 2017 is that there are phase 3 trials with a fair number of people, over 3,000 people in 20 different countries, and that is a good way to ensure that this is a robust and therapeutic effect. The results will be coming within a year. Look for this. If you know someone suffering from AD, perhaps this is a drug to discuss with your physician. But this is promising in terms of a new treatment for a very debilitating disease. I do not want to leave you at this juncture with the feeling that no progress is being made. I think it is highly likely that your grandkids will have access to significantly more therapeutic drugs. 24 are in active trial with large pools of subjects. Cost of treatment could be an issue, but real work is being done to open low-cost ways of drug delivery. We see one here on the slide. Intranasal delivery would be very cost-effective and has shown to be feasible with mice. Humans are the next step. There is also very promising research coming from a tried-and-true technology of ultrasound. Turns out that ultrasound, when focused on the blood-brain barrier, is effective at opening new pathways for drug delivery. That would help lower cost and increase effectiveness. However, the medical and government communities have not adequately addressed the question of how to decide who gets such treatment, especially if the cost of such treatment is quite expensive. These are very difficult issues, and they need to be thoroughly evaluated in terms of policy before the treatments are widely available. Remember, not only can each of you help progress the scientific effort here, each of you can lower your risk, as shown here on the right of the slide. Lifestyle and modifiable factors account for up to 35% of the risk of AD. That means you have a significant chance of lowering your likelihood of AD by using the techniques we have talked about in this section. I strongly encourage each of you to do so. Time now for Homer to weigh in for the section summary. And to put it bluntly, Homer is worried. For those of you who watch The Simpsons, you know that Homer's lifestyle is not exactly conducive to good nutrition, aerobic exercise, and building cognitive reserve. So Homer knows he is now at high risk for AD. But without rationalizing, Homer can truthfully state that there are positive developments that show great promise for all of us, even him. Each of us can do something as of today to help lower our risks, even Homer. And each of us can start doing something today to help progress research. And those are very, very good things. We now turn our attention to some new horizons in brain research. The first area we cover is the horribly named Default Mode Network, or DMN for short. This brain network is shown by the solid yellow areas in the rotating brain structure on the slide. Note that this is a significant area of your brain, and it's very, very important. What does it do? Well, a picture is worth 1,000 words, as they say. Here is a fanciful depiction of what the DMN does in the typical human brain. In essence, the DMN is the, quote, mind-wandering network. It's what your brain does when it doesn't have anything better to do. I think once you look at some of these thoughts in the diagram, you'll see some familiar stuff and realize that your brain does this quite a bit on the average day. Let's take a closer look at this network. You measure the operation of the DMN in an MRI scanner as shown on the right. The subject goes into the scanner and has no assigned task. They just lay there thinking. When they do that, the DMN area of your brain synchronizes significantly. Now, much of that synchrony is probably thinking, quote, when do I get out of here? But once you get used to the noise, subjects report that they fall into thought patterns like this, the one we just saw in the section title slide. In other words, your mind wanders, and the synchrony and the activation of the DMN reflect this. Suppose we now give you a task to do, is illustrated here. You're to report the animal in the picture, not the words. So on the second row, second picture, you would say chicken, not elephant. When you focus on that task, there is a marked reduction in the activity and synchronization of the DMN. Why a reduction? Well, you're not doing this. You're not daydreaming. This is a robust effect shown across many kinds of tasks. It's really kind of obvious, right? You're focused on the task, not mentally wandering about your psyche. Thus, the deactivation of the DMN is helpful. It lets you focus on the task. There is a strong effect of age on the DMN. Turns out that the older you get, the less deactivation you see when focusing on tasks. So think about that. The older you get, the harder it is to focus on a task since your DMN does not get out of the way, and hence your mind wanders and you do less well on the task at hand. Here we have a blindingly obvious fact being confirmed by advanced brain research. Wonder how much that cost. Wouldn't it be great if we could positively affect this? In other words, keep better control of our DMN and focus better on the task at hand. Well, it turns out there's a great way. It's called meditation. Believe it or not, the use of meditation has been extensively studied in rigorous brain research and found to be very positive in the maintenance of the DMN. Meditation traditions have varied over several methods, Theravada, Saja, and others. Results not only showed better ability to focus on the task with meditators, but also increased brain volume over the whole brain. So, dude, this is not just some new age mumbo jumbo. This stuff could really help your brain. But don't take my word for it. Let's see an ABC newscaster give his personal views.
There's no way a fidgety and skeptical news anchor would ever have started meditating were it not for the science. The science is really compelling. It shows that meditation can boost your immune system, lower your blood pressure, help you deal with problems ranging from irritable bowel syndrome to psoriasis. And the neuroscience is where it really gets sci-fi. There was a study out of Harvard that shows that short daily doses of meditation can literally grow the gray matter in key areas of your brain having to do with self-awareness and compassion, and shrink the gray matter in the area associated with stress. There was also a study out of Yale that looked at what's called the default mode network of the brain. It's a connected series of brain regions that are active during most of our waking hours when we're doing that thing that human beings do all the time, which is obsessing about ourselves, thinking about the past, thinking about the future, doing anything but being focused on what's happening right now. Meditators not only turn off the default mode network of their brain while they're meditating, but even when they're not meditating. In other words, meditators are setting a new default mode. And what's that default mode? They're focused on what's happening right now. In sports, this is called being in the zone. It's nothing mystical. It's not magical. You're not floating off into cosmic ooze. You are just being where you are. The cliche in self-help circles is being in the now. You can use that term if you want, but because it's accurate, it's slightly annoying, but it's accurate. It's more just being focused on what you're doing. And the benefits of that are enormous. And this is why you're seeing these unlikely meditators now, why you're seeing the U.S. Marines adopting it, the U.S. Army, corporate executives from the head of Ford to the founders of Twitter, athletes from Phil Jackson to many, many Olympians, scientists, doctors, lawyers, school children. There's this sort of elite subculture of high achievers who are adopting this because they know it can help you be more focused on what you're doing, and it can stop you from being yanked around by the voice in your head. My powers of prognostication are not great. I bought a lot of stock in the company that made Palm Pilot back in 2000, and that didn't go so well for me. But having said that, I'm going to make a prediction. I think we're looking at meditation as the next big public health revolution. In the 1940s, if you told people that you went running, they would say, who's chasing you? Right now, if you tell people you meditate, and I have a lot of experience with telling people this, they're going to look at you like you're a little weird most of the time. That's going to change. Meditation is going to join the pantheon of no-brainers like exercise, brushing your teeth, and taking the meds that your doctor prescribes to you. These are all things that if you don't do, you feel guilty about. And that is where I think we're heading with meditation, because the science is so strongly suggestive that meditation can do really, really great things for your brain and for your body. The common assumption that we have, and it may be subconscious, is that our happiness really depends on external factors. How was our childhood? Have we won the lottery recently? Did we marry well? Did we marry at all? But in fact, meditation suggests that happiness is actually a skill, something you can train just the way you can train your body in the gym. It's a self-generated thing. And that's a really radical notion. It doesn't mean that external circumstances aren't going to impact your happiness. It doesn't mean you're not going to be subject to the vagaries of an impermanent, entropic universe. It just means you are going to be able to navigate this with a little bit more ease.
The second new horizon we're going to talk about is less than a decade old. It deals with the bacteria in your gut, in other words, your intestines. As it turns out, there are strong correlations between what is in your gut and the quality of your life, especially as you age. In this section, we'll investigate if gut microbes can affect your brain, and are the effects harmful, beneficial, or both. It is a fascinating story, and research in this area is highly active and interesting. Let's take a quick look at why this area of research is so active today. And the bottom line is numbers. You might think that your brain has a lot of neurons, 84 billion in fact. Well, there's a lot more microbes in your body than cells in your brain, by a factor of 1,000 or more. That's a lot of microbes. And as it turns out, there's a lot of different microbes there as well. 10,000 different species in your body. But the real number that's important is the 90% number at the top of this slide. That is the number of diseases of the body that can be linked directly or indirectly to microbes of the body. Mind-blowing, is it not? Now, what has that got to do with your brain and aging or dysfunction? Well, a lot. The community of bacteria in your gut, the microbiome, has been linked to a wide variety of health conditions, including autoimmune diseases, resistance to infection, many types of cancer, asthma, and cystic fibrosis, to name a few. New research shows that this community changes with age. Most importantly, the microbiome becomes less diverse, and there's a decrease in good microbes, which seem to be associated with an increase in frailty. Often such decreases in good microbes are associated with obese subjects. These changes are globally associated with aging, but what about brain disease? There is emerging brain research of a clear link between the gut and the brain. It is bidirectional. What is in your brain affects your gut, but just as importantly, what is in your gut affects your brain. This communication pathway can be shown to affect anxiety, depression, pain experience, autism, and others. Recently, the motor deficits of a Parkinson's disease was transmitted to the brain of mice via a bacterial load into the gut, most probably via the vagus nerve as shown here on the slide. Other research has shown that Alzheimer's disease can begin in the gut, cause inflammation in the brain, and even transport amyloid substances into the brain from the gut. In essence, you are not only what you eat, your brain is too. This brings us to 4 very innovative forms of treatment. Not $1 million monoclonal antibodies or other kinds of esoteric high-tech stuff, but practical, low-cost treatments that are being tested now. First, we talked earlier about obese subjects having a bad balance of gut microbes, so caloric restriction is very helpful with such subjects as long as the disease has not progressed too far. Second, I know I'm a broken record on physical exercise, so you get the dog walking advertisement here for physical activity, right? Third, we're in the very early days of transplantation of microbes from one human to another, but the early results are very positive and intense research is happening here. And then fourth, there are probiotics. Let's talk about them next. There are really 2 categories of food that have been shown to have positive effects on the aging of your brain overall and the amelioration of neuronal degenerative diseases in specific. Prebiotics, shown on the left, often fruits and vegetables, and probiotics, shown on the right, often fermented foods. Each of these classes of food contain live microorganisms which are linked to positive changes in the gut microbiome. While research has shown positive effects in elderly populations, care needs to be taken so that one does not overdo it. Also, be careful what you believe in the popular press and TV. There are wild claims out there. You do not need to overdose on expensive pills from the health store. You need to do what your mother and father told you to do. Eat your vegetables, prebiotics. Don't be afraid to try new foods like yogurt, probiotics. Don't be a pig at the table. In other words, stay lean and go outside and play. In other words, get some exercise. Who knew our parents were so smart? So what does Homer have to say about this? Well, Homer is amazed that meditating for something other than beer could be good for you. But Homer and I encourage you to look into this, and you don't have to tell anybody, but you might be glad you did. Also, Homer can engage in a kind of selective memory. Who ever told him to do those things? Well, I'll bet his parents did, just like our parents told us to do those things. We might not have listened then, but it's not too late to start as we age. In this last section of the seminar, we'll cover two major items. First, what can be done to help your brain when your brain, is injured? In particular, we'll look at stroke. And second, how your brain can help your body when your body is injured. In both areas, there's exciting developments in progress, so let's take a look at them now. A stroke is an event that harms an area of your brain. There's two types. By far the most common is termed ischemic. It's a condition where something plugs a blood vessel in your brain and the affected neurons are deprived of blood flow. Brain neurons are notoriously hungry. They consume over 25% of your caloric intake each day, and they quickly die if blood flow is cut off. The second type of stroke is where a vessel wall breaks at a point of weakness. This causes an interruption of blood flow as well as swelling of the brain. This is a double whammy since neurons are starved of blood and the brain overall gets increased pressure since the skull cavity is fixed in volume. In the U.S., stroke is the prime cause of long-term disability, and it results in over $40 billion of cost to the economy on an annual basis. Stroke is a global problem as well, where lifestyle is a key contributing factor. Steps to prevent are easily found on the internet, and most probably with your annual discussion with your doctor. Today, I want to talk about new treatments for when a stroke has already occurred. New treatments are needed in the case of stroke because current treatments are not satisfactory on many levels. Since stroke involves the death of brain neurons, one hope was that stem cells or associated factors would be a magic bullet in treatment. As we see on the left, there are several sources of stem cells and their factors. But unfortunately, out of over 1,000 substances tested over the last decade, only one is credited as a therapeutic treatment, and it must be administered within 4.5 hours of stroke onset, which is almost impossible to achieve. A second line of investigation was early intervention immediately following stroke. In other words, get the patient up and moving immediately after stroke or admission to the hospital. As it turns out, this has no therapeutic effect, as shown on the right. Continuing to look at the right, note that over time, there is recovery of function, but it takes time, lots of time. 20 to 30 days is often the case, as shown in the recovery of walking in this section on the right. An emerging consensus then is to, quote, work with what is left. That means help the brain reorganize as best it can using good nutrition, exercise, and physical therapy, but also explore new technologies to help the remaining areas of the brain take over old function, either directly or indirectly. Some of these therapies use widely available consumer technology. Just like we've seen earlier in this seminar, such technology can be a really great help. Here is an example of a person using virtual reality training to augment physical therapy. It has been shown to be cost-effective and usable in nursing homes and assisted living centers. It's been quite helpful in the recovery of movement, say walking, and it has also turned out to be fun for the patients. Who would have guessed? So if you walk into an assisted living center in the near future and you see a lady like this, don't laugh. She's not just being hip, she's being healthy. Many of these new technologies originated in a set of experiments done in 2008 in the laboratory of Dr. Andrew Schwartz at the University of Pittsburgh. This research was the first to show a monkey's brain directly controlling, with a fine level of detail, a robotic hand. The monkey is only connected to the robotic arm via a set of electrodes in his brain. A computer reads the signal and then causes the arm to move. The monkey attempts to do a series of tasks and then is rewarded with juice coming out of this copper tube. In early videos, the monkey resembled Yoda raising the starship on Star Wars, so the name Jedi Monkey stuck to the video and to the monkey in the research community. From the vantage point of 2016, the experiments of 2008 seem quaint, kind of like your first mobile phone. The old stuff was big, slow, and expensive. But the Jedi Monkey showed what could be done. What then remained was to make it small, cheap, and vastly more functional, just like the phone in your pocket or purse today. In 2016, brain electrodes are made in arrays. They are tiny, tiny, tiny. They have embedded material to sharpen the resolution of detected brain activity. But the real breakthrough progress has been in the hand and arms of the robot. Today, there are robot hands that have the full 30 degrees of freedom of the hand on your body. These robotic hands are revolutionary in the terms of capability, but they still need to be controlled by a brain, and that's where the current challenge is located, and that's where the current focus of progress is in research. Follow-on research by different technology labs and researchers focus on improving the technology so that surgery is not required to implant electrodes. This would eliminate a major item of cost and risk. A sample headset is shown on the left, and a sample use is shown on the right. The control of a wheelchair. The wheelchair would be controlled by thought, so it could be used by someone who have lost complete control of their limbs or partial loss of their limbs. A different theme of research enabled by the Jedi Monkey deals with a device called an exoskeleton. This device can be used by people with lumbar or thoracic spine lesions, people who still have the use of their arms but not their legs. Fantastic progress is being made here on a Jedi timeline. Let's see what the state of the art is today, and then on the next slide, project into the near future.
I had a car accident in 2004, so 8 years ago. I was a passenger in the right front seat and I broke my spinal cord. The doctor said I will never walk again. I don't believe that. I'm Agnes and I'm a rewalker. Before my accident, I enjoyed walking and enjoyed to go in the streets and just touring in the cities. I was a big traveler. After my accident, getting in a wheelchair, I have hard time when I traveled. When I realized I can live in a wheelchair, I mean, I can be completely independent in a wheelchair. I can do anything what you want. Just depend on me to decide to live my life again or just leaning in a bed. And I decided I live in my life again. If I want to live my life longer than I can live in just sitting in a wheelchair, so if I want to be a better quality of life or a longer life, if you want to healthier, I need to use a device like this. First time when I tried the Rewalk, I was very surprised how strong the Rewalk. After 7 years, that was the first time when I stood up in front of my brother in an eye level and he can walk with me on the street. I always wanted to walk again, and I'm walking.
Helping people to walk again is a major advance in science. Yes, the state-of-the-art device is a bit clunky, But as you saw in the video, it is a miracle to those who are bound to a wheelchair. But Jedi technology is on the way. Technology is wonderful at miniaturization, and this clunky device is now this. It is a flexible strip of high-tech plastic called E-Dura. It can deliver electrical stimulation to a set of nerves, but it can also deliver chemicals as well. Let's see it in action with a rat who has sustained spinal cord damage just like the person in the video we saw. It will be obvious that a researcher is narrating, and unfortunately, no closed captioning is available.
The E-Dura was implanted over lumbar segments of adult rats. They received a severe contusion that spared less than 10% of spinal tissues. Rats were maintained bipedally in a robotic bodyweight support system over a moving treadmill belt. Without any stimulation, the rats were completely paralyzed. A serotonergic replacement therapy delivered through the chemotrode did not promote movement. When adding unilateral electrical stimulation, rats instantly regained movements on the stimulated side. Concurrent chemical and bilateral electrical stimulation promoted weight-bearing locomotion of both legs. The electrochemical neuroprosthesis restored continuous, coordinated locomotion in the paralyzed rats.
Development of this technology is targeted at implantation of the small device into the spinal cord of an accident victim. Yes, it is early days, but progress in this area has been rapid. The person who would ultimately receive such a device would not need an exoskeleton, but would be able to walk unassisted and free. Wouldn't that be amazing? Now we go from the movies to TV. Anyone remember The Bionic Man? Well, this is slightly different. Here we have a situation where we want to use the contraction of muscles rather than thought to control a robot arm or hand. The reason we want to do this is that picking up the signals that contract a muscle are far easier and cheaper than opening up the skull to implant electrodes. And it's far more reliable than picking up EEG signals with a headset. In this example, we'll monitor the muscles that contract when someone thinks about closing the hand. We would then have a reliable signal to control a robot hand to close. That's a great idea, but there's often one problem. The muscle we want to monitor could be too weak or not there, as in the limb was amputated. So what we do is we re-implant the nerve that controls the muscle, that controls the closing of the hand, into somewhere else. Thus, when the patient thinks about closing his hand, some other muscle will move. But that's okay. We can still use it as a signal to control the robot hand, which is what we wanted to do in the first place. It sounds a bit complicated, but when you see it in action, it's inspiring. The person in this clip lost both his arms over 10 years ago in an electrical accident. Using the advancements of the Jedi Monkey and other robotic innovations, the people at Johns Hopkins have produced a bionic set of arms that will give this person the ability to reach and hold again. As part of the process, the scientists moved nerves that control his arms and hands to his chest. That reinnervation then allowed the vest holding the robot arms to pick up signals for control. The person thinks about moving his arms and picking things up, and the arms react. Let's see the story. Closed captioning was not available, so only audio is available in the clip.
Arriving at APL this past summer to participate in an on-site field study with the Modular Prosthetic Limb, MPL, Les Baugh and his girlfriend were excited about the possibilities. Accompanying them is Dr. Albert Chi, who, as part of the interdisciplinary team from the Johns Hopkins Hospital, performed the targeted reinnervation surgery necessary for today's visit.
I went into the surgery knowing that he was going to move nerves in my chest. I remember when I first came out from under it, the pain I'd never had. I don't even remember the original being that much excruciating pain, but I imagine part of that my mind blocked out anyway.
Les had lost both limbs in a freak electrical accident over 40 years ago and is excited to become the first shoulder-level amputee to have the MPL fully and wirelessly integrated into his body.
It started with really intensive training with our pattern recognition system. And what the pattern recognition system is a advanced algorithm that really looks at high-density electrode arrays on the chest muscles, which we've reinnervated, that looks at the almost signature symphony of muscle activity information, and we take that information and translate that to actual movements within a prosthetic.
Let's go ahead and see what we have.
On this day, Les is being fitted for his socket, which is sort of a body brace that makes the neural connections with the reinnervated nerves, as well as supports the prosthetic limbs.
The first cast they did on me for the test socket was all done with electronics. They took like a scanner, and just started walking around my body, and they just painted it on the screen, and boom, they sent it off, and I get out here and it fits. This guy says, no, I can't feel every little dimple and divot that I want to feel. He says, I want to do it with plastic.
Great.
And this old school is working out so much better than the modern.
While the socket got its finishing touches, the team took the next step and had Les work with the virtual reality system that mimics the actual prosthetic arms.
Relax. Let's do some elbow up. Good. Relax.
A couple days later, the socket was back, and the arms were attached. Les and the team were about to make history.
Once the training sessions were complete and they released me and let me be the computer, basically, to control that arm, I just go into a whole different world.
I think we're just getting started at this point. It's like the early days of the internet. There's just a tremendous amount of potential ahead of us, and we've just started down this road. And I think the next 5-10 years are going to bring some really phenomenal advancements.
Other milestones reached by the team were, this was the first time the MPLs were operated by a shoulder-level amputee at the full 3 degrees of freedom and with over 30 total degrees of motion on both sides, with complete intuitive thought-based control.
He has access to all of the different degrees of motion, shoulder, elbow, wrist, hand, but he still needs to select which one he wants to use. So he needs to position the shoulder, then the elbow, then the wrist, then the hand separately and rest in between.
Maybe I'll be able to, for once, be able to put change in a pop machine and get the pop out of it. Simple things like that that most people never think of. And it's re-available to me.
Okay, and both of them.
What we'd really like to be able to do is send him home with a couple of limbs so that, you know, he can use them in his everyday life. And what this showed us is that that's really possible.
All of us on this RP 2009 team, regardless of the type of patient we're fitting, are committed to making every effort to see that this ultimately reaches the end user in a way that they can actually utilize it.
That's awesome.
It's not just the accomplishment, but the opening of frontiers and realizing that there's so much more to learn.
This unique opportunity of interfacing with the end user, utilizing our technology, provides valuable feedback to the team. Feedback that will assist this DARPA-developed technology in helping wounded warriors and others to regain the 27 degrees of freedom possessed by the human arm.
After that, Homer is uncharacteristically speechless. Basically, Homer thinks this is awesome. I hope you are as thrilled about progress in this section as I was when I first saw it. Expect that over the next decade, amazing progress will be made. These advancements will not only bring grace to our generation, but will surely bring many miracles to our grandchildren. This concludes the seminar series. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have enjoyed making this seminar series. I thought it would be beneficial to kind of give you my 3 thoughts to take away, the top 3 ideas that I would say distill the essence of this seminar. I call them the 3 C's. The first is to conserve your brain. Your brain is a marvel of the universe, so take care of it. Do what your mother and father told you to do, sit up straight, eat your vegetables, and walk the dog, or your cat, or your pet iguana, or tortoise, or whatever. And do it with a friend if possible. The social stimulation, the aerobic exercise will do you good. The second is to celebrate the progress in the understanding of an organ that's more complex than the galaxies above our head. And also celebrate the progress that we have seen in relieving human suffering via neurotherapeutics. If you can, take a neuropsychologist out for a lunch or drink someday. And then finally, consider the fact that your brain and all other brains on this planet have unconscious systems that encode evolutionary skills that were essential for our emergence. Perhaps they're unhelpful in today's society, but use your advanced brain systems to deliberate and construct actions that can moderate them as appropriate in today's society. The audition of players for a symphony orchestra is a good example. To conclude, I have a short film of credits to thank people who were so helpful in the construction of this seminar, and a few pictures of Austin, Texas, my home. This is Steve Saltwick.
Texas.